Alrighty, it is the 10th, and we are going to be multiplying complex numbers. So remember, a complex number has a real part and an imaginary part, just like this. So, yesterday we talked about adding and subtracting complex numbers, and there was a special thing that had to happen. And that was, you could only add real parts to real parts and imaginary parts to imaginary parts. But when you multiply, something special happens. You can multiply the real parts times the imaginary parts, no problem, and the imaginary parts times the real parts. So you're going to be using FOIL. Right? First times first, that would be 8. For the outside guys, 4 times 3, that would be 12i. The inside guys, that would be 10i. And then the last guys, that would be 5 times 3, 15. And then I times I is I squared. Now, this is very important, because since I equals the square root of -1, if I square I, I'm really squaring -1. Now, if you remember, when you square a square root, those things cancel out, and all that's left is the number inside. So I squared is actually -1. So that means that this, instead of being 15 times I squared, it's really 15 times -1. Well, that's -15, right? So, what I have here is the answer to the problem. But I can't write it like this. This is not the way you have to write it. You have to write it so that there's just one real number and one imaginary number. Well, the real numbers are right here. 8 minus 15. Yeah, 8 minus 15, that's -7. And then 12 plus 10, that's 22. So, this is the actual answer when you multiply these numbers together. You say, what? Yes. So, the most important thing to remember is when you have I squared, you really have -1. Right? So, whenever you write these down, you combine the like terms, you combine the i's together, and you combine the real numbers together, because this is a real number, and this as well, right? So you have to get the real parts together after you multiply, and the imaginary parts together after you multiply. Let's do it again. Yay! Okay. What about 7 minus 6i times 5 plus 4i. There we go. We'll just multiply those. Once again, we have to use FOIL every single time. So 7 times 5, that's 35. 7 times 4, that's 28. -6 times 5, whoops, I erased my number. -6 times 5 is -30i, and then -6 times +4, that's -24i squared. But then remember what I squared is. I squared is -1. So this is really -24 times -1. Negative times negative? Ha! +24. That's +24. This is +35. Those are the real parts. and then 28i minus 30i. Those are the imaginary parts. So I have to get the real parts together. So 35 plus 24 is 59. And then 28 minus 30, negative 2. Bing, 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 bing. We have a winner. Special. Huh. Now there's one other thing that can happen whenever you multiply. And I will show you. So what if we had 5 plus 11i and then 5 minus 11i, right? So I still multiply. 5 times 5, 25. 5 times negative 11, negative 55. Ooh. Then positive 55. And then 11 times 11, that's negative 121i squared. Right? Well, look at this. Negative 55i and positive 55i, these guys are opposites each other and they cancel out. And remember, this is a real number. This is also a real number because I squared is negative 1. This is really negative times negative 1. That would be positive 121. So 25 plus 121, that's 146. It's a real number. I multiplied two complex numbers together and I got a real number. Now that's special. That only happens whenever they're conjugates. This is what's called a conjugate. When the numbers are all the same, except the imaginary number is positive here and negative here. If they're opposites to each other, then when you multiply them, that's what happens. You get a real answer. Okay, so what's the only other thing we can happen? I guess we should do monom. So let's do 7 times 2 minus 3i, and then we could do maybe, I don't know, 8i times 3 plus 2i. Okay, so when I multiply this one times this one, this is just, now you're just distributing, right? Distribute, right? So that's 14. This times this, that would be minus 21. Oops, 21i. That's the answer. Remember, it has to look like this when you're done. It has to have the real part in front and the imaginary part behind. So when I do this one, 8 times 3, that's 24i. 8 times 2, that's 16i squared, right? Remember, I squared is negative 1. That makes this negative 16 and positive 24i, right? Now this is the answer, but it's not in the right order because you have to have the real number in front. So that's negative 16. Negative 16 is the real number. Positive 24i is the imaginary number. This is the actual answer to this. So if you write it like this, you'll get zapped minus 1. So you have to put it in the right order, and you will be a happy camper. Always real numbers, then imaginary numbers, and you're done. You should be ready for today's homework. Bye-bye.